For decades, fitness culture has told us that if an exercise doesn't hurt, doesn't leave you sore, doesn't make your muscles burn, then it's probably not doing much for your health. And swimming? Swimming has been the poster child for easy exercise. The thing you do when you're recovering from an injury, the gentle option for people who can't handle real workouts. But here's the finding that stopped me cold when I first came across it. A 2022 study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine followed over 80,000 adults for nearly 2 decades, and the data showed that regular swimmers had a 28% lower risk of death from any cause and a 41% lower risk of death from heart disease and stroke, compared to people who didn't exercise at all. Those numbers are not gentle. Those are not recovery exercise numbers. But here's the part that really rewired how I think about movement. Those mortality benefits in swimmers were comparable to, and in some measures actually exceeded, what researchers observed in runners. The people we've been told are getting the gold standard cardiovascular workout, and the swimmers achieved all of this without a single foot striking pavement. Welcome to Longevity Lab. I'm Claire.
And I'm Robert. Claire, I have to admit something right at the start here. I swam competitively in high school, and I've always loved being in the water. But for the last, 40 years or so, I've kind of absorbed this idea that swimming was my light exercise day. You know, the thing I do when my knees are bothering me or when I want to take it easy. Weight training, that was the real work. Running, that was the real cardio. Swimming was almost recreational in my mind. Are you telling me I've been underestimating the best exercise I do all week?
I think that's exactly what I'm telling you, Robert. And you're not alone. This misconception is so deeply embedded in how we talk about exercise that even many doctors and physical therapists don't fully appreciate what the evidence actually shows about water-based movement. The fitness industry has been so fixated on high-impact, ground reaction force exercise that we've created this hierarchy where movement that doesn't hurt is somehow less valuable. And the science just doesn't support that.
But wait, let me push back a little here, because I think this represents what a lot of people my age believe. Don't you need impact to build bone density? Don't you need heavy resistance to maintain muscle mass as you age? I always thought swimming was wonderful for my heart and my joints, but I never counted on it for my bones or my strength. I figured I needed to be in the gym for that.
This is exactly the question to ask. And you're framing what is probably the single most common belief that keeps people from viewing swimming as a complete standalone exercise modality. The idea goes like this: water supports your body weight, so your bones don't get the mechanical loading they need to maintain density. Swimming is low resistance, so your muscles don't get enough stimulus to grow or even maintain themselves. Therefore, swimming is incomplete. It's half an exercise. And on the surface, no pun intended, that logic seems sound. But when researchers actually started measuring what happens to swimmers' bodies over time, the story got a lot more interesting.
Okay, so what did they find? Because if you're about to tell me that swimming builds bone density the same way running does, I'm going to be genuinely confused. I can feel the difference. When I run, every step sends a shock up through my skeleton. When I swim, there's no shock at all. How could those two things produce the same result? I mean, the physics don't seem to add up.
You're absolutely right that the mechanisms are different, and that's precisely what makes this so fascinating. The assumption that only ground reaction forces stimulate bone remodeling is incomplete. What the research is now showing is that muscle contraction itself, particularly against resistance, generates enough mechanical tension on bone attachment sites to stimulate osteoblast activity. Those are your bone-building cells. And when you're swimming, you're not just floating. You're pulling your body through a medium that is roughly 800 times denser than air. Every stroke is a resisted movement. Your latissimus dorsi, your pectorals, your deltoids, they're all pulling hard against water resistance. And those muscle contractions are pulling on the bones they're attached to. A 2021 systematic review and meta-analysis published in Osteoporosis International examined 18 clinical trials on aquatic exercise and bone health, and the findings challenged a lot of assumptions. In postmenopausal women who are at the highest risk for bone loss, regular swimming and water-based resistance training actually slowed bone density decline compared to sedentary controls. Some studies even showed modest increases in bone mineral density at the lumbar spine.
Wait, the spine? How does swimming affect your spine specifically? If you're floating horizontally in water, there's no vertical compression loading on your vertebrae. I would have guessed that swimming does nothing for spinal bone density. Actually, I would have guessed it might even reduce it because you're taking all the load off.
And this is where the mechanism gets really elegant. When you're swimming freestyle or backstroke, your core musculature, your erector spina, your multifetus, your deep spinal stabilizers are working constantly to maintain body position in the water. You're not just lying flat, you're actively stabilizing against water turbulence, rotation from your stroke, and the need to keep your body streamlined. Those muscles attach directly to your vertebrae, and when they contract repeatedly under the resistance of water, they're applying tension to the bone. Bone doesn't just respond to compression, it responds to tension and torsion as well. The body is more sophisticated than our simple impact versus no impact model suggests. This is also why researchers are now looking more carefully at swimming's effects on people with osteoarthritis. For decades, the advice to arthritis patients was essentially move less, protect your joints. And what the evidence now clearly shows is that joint cartilage requires movement to stay healthy. Synovial fluid, that's the lubricating fluid inside your joints, doesn't have its own blood supply. It relies on movement and compression to circulate nutrients and remove waste products. When you stop moving, cartilage literally starves. Swimming provides movement across the full range of motion of joints like the shoulders, hips, and knees, and it does so without the painful compressive forces that make land exercise unbearable for many arthritis patients. A randomized controlled trial published in the Scandinavian Journal of Rheumatology showed that patients with knee osteoarthritis who did water-based exercise 3 times a week for 12 weeks reported a 33% reduction in pain scores, and the improvements in functional mobility were maintained at a 1-year follow-up.
33% reduction in pain? That's not a small clinical improvement. That's life-changing for someone who's been told their only option is medication or joint replacement. And here's what I'm realizing as you describe this, Claire. I've been thinking about exercise wrong. I've been treating my body like a machine that either gets sufficient load or doesn't. But you're describing a biological system that responds to a much wider range of stimuli than I ever gave it credit for. The muscles pulling on bone, that makes intuitive sense to me now. I can feel that tension when I swim. I just never connected it to bone health before.
You've just articulated what I think is the most important reframe in exercise science right now. We've been in a biomechanical era where we thought about the body in terms of levers and forces and mechanical loading, and that model isn't wrong exactly, but it's incomplete. The body is a living, adaptable biological system that responds to movement in ways that are far more nuanced than step on it harder to make it stronger. And this brings us to what I think is the most overlooked benefit of swimming, the cardiovascular piece. And I don't just mean swimming is good for your heart. The mechanism is actually unique to water immersion, and it has implications for blood pressure, circulation, and even cognitive function that land exercise simply cannot replicate.
Okay, now you've got my full attention. What happens to your cardiovascular system in water that doesn't happen on land?
It's called the hydrostatic pressure effect. When you're submerged in water up to your neck, The pressure of the water itself, not your movement, just the water column, exerts approximately 22 millimeters of mercury of pressure on your body. That's a significant compressive force. What does that do? It pushes blood from your extremities and your lower body up towards your central circulation. Your thoracic cavity, your heart, your lungs, they're receiving a greater volume of blood return than they do when you're standing on land. Your heart responds to this increased central blood volume by stretching a little more with each beat, which triggers what's called the Frank-Starling mechanism. The heart muscle fibers, when stretched optimally, contract more forcefully. Your stroke volume, the amount of blood your heart pumps with each beat, increases by about 30 to 40% during water immersion. This means your heart becomes more efficient. It's delivering more oxygenated blood per beat. And here's the part that I find genuinely astonishing. Because your heart is operating more efficiently, your resting heart rate typically drops by 5 to 15 beats per minute when you're in the water, even while you're exercising, compared to the same perceived exertion level on land. Your blood pressure decreases. Vascular resistance decreases. You're essentially giving your cardiovascular system a workout while simultaneously reducing the workload on your heart. It's a paradox that only exists because of the unique physics of water.
So you're getting a stronger heart muscle contraction, but with lower blood pressure and a lower heart rate. That sounds almost too good to be true. Are there actual long-term studies on this, or is this just an acute effect that goes away when you get out of the pool?
Excellent question, and this is exactly where the evidence gets really compelling. The acute effects are well documented: the drop in blood pressure, the increased stroke volume, the reduced heart rate. But what about lasting adaptations? A landmark study published in the American Journal of Cardiology followed a group of older adults with prehypertension, that's blood pressure in the 129/80 to 89 range, through a 12-week swimming program. They swam 3 times per week, gradually building up to 45 minutes per session. By the end of the study, the swimming group had reduced their systolic blood pressure, the top number, by an average of 9 millimeters of mercury. To put that in perspective, that's comparable to what you'd expect from a first-line blood pressure medication. But unlike medication, there were no side effects, and the participants also showed improvements in arterial stiffness, which is a key marker of vascular aging. Their arteries literally became more flexible. A separate study in the Journal of Hypertension found similar results and added an interesting detail. The blood pressure reductions from swimming were actually greater than what the same researchers observed in a comparable walking program. The hydrostatic pressure effect, combined with the full-body nature of swimming, seemed to provide a unique cardiovascular stimulus.
9 points of systolic blood pressure reduction. My doctor would be thrilled if I could achieve that, and I've been on blood pressure medication for about 8 years now. Robert, I want to be very careful here. I am not in any way suggesting that anyone should view swimming as a replacement for a prescribed medication. If you're on blood pressure medication, stopping it without medical supervision can be genuinely dangerous. But what this research does suggest is that for someone with mild hypertension or prehypertension, or for someone who wants to support their medication regimen with lifestyle changes, swimming appears to be a uniquely powerful tool. And of course, this is absolutely a conversation to have with your doctor. I'm interested in adding swimming to my routine. How should we monitor my blood pressure? And should we adjust anything? That's the right approach. That's a really important caveat, and I'm glad you said it. But the science here is genuinely exciting to me. I had no idea that there was a physiological mechanism specific to water immersion that could produce these kinds of cardiovascular adaptations. I always just thought swimming was good for your heart because it was aerobic. You know, like any activity that gets your heart rate up.
That's been the standard assumption, and it's not wrong exactly. But what we're learning is that the aquatic environment provides a stimulus that is qualitatively different from, not just easier than, but different from land-based aerobic exercise. And this becomes even more important when we think about populations for whom land exercise is difficult or painful. People with severe obesity for whom joint loading is a genuine barrier. People with peripheral neuropathy from diabetes who can't feel their feet well enough to walk safely on uneven surfaces. People with advanced osteoarthritis. People recovering from stroke who have balance deficits. The water doesn't just make exercise easier for these populations, it makes exercise possible. And it does so while providing a cardiovascular stimulus that may actually be superior in some respects to what they could achieve on land.
You mentioned cognition earlier. What does water immersion have to do with brain function? I haven't heard that connection before.
This is a newer area of research, and I find it fascinating. Remember how I described the hydrostatic pressure pushing blood toward your central circulation? Well, your brain is part of that central circulation. Cerebral blood flow increases during water immersion. A study published in the journal Physiology and Behavior used Doppler ultrasound to measure blood flow in the middle cerebral artery while participants were immersed in water. They found a 14% increase in cerebral blood flow velocity. Now, we have to be careful not to overinterpret a single study, but this aligns with a growing body of evidence suggesting that aquatic exercise may have particular cognitive benefits. A 2020 systematic review in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health looked at the cognitive effects of water-based exercise in older adults and found consistent improvements in executive function, attention, and processing speed. The proposed mechanisms include that increased cerebral blood flow, but also the cognitive demands of being in water. You're navigating a three-dimensional environment, you're coordinating complex movement patterns, you're constantly making micro-adjustments for balance and buoyancy. There's a cognitive richness to swimming that we don't get from more repetitive land-based exercise like treadmill walking.
I have to tell you, Claire, I'm sitting here rethinking my entire relationship with the pool. I've been swimming 2 or 3 times a week for years, but I always treated it as my light day, my recovery day, maybe even my cheat day from real exercise. And now you're telling me that those swim sessions may have been doing more for my bone density, my blood pressure, my vascular health, and even my brain than the workouts I was taking so seriously at the gym. That's both humbling and kind of wonderful.
I think humbling and wonderful is exactly the right response. And you're touching on something I see all the time in my work. There's this pervasive cultural belief that exercise has to hurt to work. That if you're not exhausted, if you're not sore, if you're not grinding through discomfort, then you're not really exercising. The fitness industry has sold us this story because pain and struggle are easier to market than joy and ease. But the evidence is increasingly clear. Movement that feels good, movement that you can sustain, movement that doesn't beat up your body, that movement is not lesser. In many ways, it's superior because you'll actually keep doing it for decades.
So let me get very practical here, because I think our listeners are probably wondering the same thing. If someone wants to use swimming as their primary form of exercise, or even just wants to add it to their routine for the specific benefits we've discussed, what does the research say about frequency, duration, intensity? What's the evidence-based swimming protocol?
This is exactly where we need to go, and I want to preface this by saying that the research gives us ranges and principles, not rigid prescriptions. The best protocol is the one you'll actually follow. But here's what the evidence suggests. For cardiovascular and mortality benefits, the sweet spot appears to be swimming for at least 150 minutes per week at a moderate intensity. That's roughly 30 minutes 5 days a week. And moderate intensity in the water means you're breathing harder than normal, but can still carry on a conversation, you're not gasping. Some studies suggest that as little as 90 minutes per week, say 3 30-minute sessions, can still yield significant blood pressure reductions and joint pain improvements. So if 5 days feels overwhelming, start with 3. The dose-response relationship is not linear. You don't need to go from 0 to 5 days to get benefits. Every session counts.
What about the kind of swimming? I mean, there's a big difference between doing laps with a freestyle stroke and kind of gently bobbing around doing a leisurely breaststroke. Does the research distinguish between types of swimming?
It does, and this is an important point. The majority of the studies that show significant health outcomes involve sustained continuous swimming, what researchers call aerobic swimming. That typically means lap swimming with a stroke that elevates the heart rate and keeps it elevated. Freestyle is the most commonly studied, but backstroke and butterfly also provide vigorous full body engagement. Breaststroke tends to be lower intensity, but it can be very effective for people with shoulder issues because the arm movement is less overhead. The key is continuous movement. What the research does not support, and I want to be clear about this, is the idea that standing in the pool, chatting with friends, and occasionally doing a few arm movements provides the same benefits. Social connection in the water is wonderful and has its own health benefits. But the physiological adaptations we've been discussing require sustained aerobic effort. There's also compelling evidence for water-based interval training. A 2019 study in the European Journal of Applied Physiology compared continuous swimming to high-intensity interval swimming. That's where you swim hard for 30 to 60 seconds, then recover for a minute or two, and repeat. The interval group showed greater improvements in VO2 max, which is a measure of cardiovascular fitness, and they achieved these improvements in less total exercise time. So if you're short on time, interval swimming is a very efficient option.
Interval swimming. So I could go to the pool, do a warm up, and then do, say, 8 rounds of swimming, 1 lap as fast as I can, then 1 easy recovery lap, and be done in 25 minutes?
Exactly, and the research suggests that's a perfectly valid and highly effective workout. For someone just starting out, I'd recommend beginning with continuous moderate swimming for a few weeks to build a base, and then gradually introducing interval work once the cardiovascular system has adapted. And of course, if anyone has a pre-existing heart condition or hasn't exercised in a while, this is definitely a conversation to have with a doctor before jumping into high-intensity intervals.
What about warm water versus cool water? I know some people prefer warmer pools, especially if they have arthritis. Does water temperature change the health effects?
Good question, and the research on this is a bit mixed. Warmer water around 86 to 92 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 to 33 degrees Celsius tends to be more comfortable for people with arthritis and can increase joint range of motion. The warmth helps muscles relax, which can reduce pain during movement. But warmer water can also cause peripheral vasodilation, which means your blood vessels near the skin open up to release heat. That can slightly reduce the central blood volume effect we talked about earlier. Cooler water around 78 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit or 26 to 28 degrees Celsius preserves more of that hydrostatic cardiovascular benefit and also prevents overheating during sustained exercise. Most lap pools are kept in that cooler range for exactly these reasons. For someone whose primary goal is pain management and mobility, a warmer pool is probably better. For someone focused on cardiovascular conditioning, a standard lap pool temperature is ideal. And I'll add one more practical note here. There's some evidence that swimming in cold water, like open water swimming in lakes or oceans, triggers additional metabolic and anti-inflammatory responses, including activation of brown adipose tissue, which is metabolically active fat that burns calories to generate heat. But cold water swimming also carries risks, particularly for people with heart conditions, and should be approached very cautiously and ideally with medical guidance.
That's helpful. So warm for comfort and pain relief, cool for cardiovascular conditioning, cold for, for very adventurous people with healthy hearts and a doctor's okay. Think I'll stick with the lap pool. Claire, I want to come back to something you said earlier that I can't stop thinking about, the Japanese blue zone. You mentioned that swimming is part of the culture in Okinawa. I've read about blue zones, and I always think of walking, gardening, just kind of constant low-level movement. But swimming?
This is a part of the Blue Zone story that doesn't get enough attention. Okinawa, Japan is one of the 5 original Blue Zones, regions where people live measurably longer, healthier lives with high concentrations of centenarians. And while it's true that Okinawans engage in a lot of walking and gardening, the island culture also has a deep relationship with the ocean. Many older Okinawans swim regularly, often in the sea. And what's striking is not just that they swim, but how they swim. It's not about speed or distance. It's about joyful, consistent immersion in water. They'll swim for 20 or 30 minutes, often in groups, and it's integrated into their social lives. It's not something they have to force themselves to do. It's something they look forward to. And I think that's the lesson that gets lost in all our protocol discussions. The best exercise is the one you'll keep doing, and swimming for many people is genuinely enjoyable in a way that treadmill running never will be.
That's such an important point, and it connects to something I've noticed in my own life. On the days I swim, I never have to talk myself into going. I genuinely want to be in the water. The gym requires a bit of self-discipline. The pool just feels like a reward. And now, knowing what I know about the science, I can enjoy it even more. Knowing I'm not cheating myself, I'm actually doing something that has unique physiological value.
And I think that's the message I want everyone to take away from this episode. Exercise doesn't have to be punishing to be powerful. The water isn't a second choice environment for people who can't handle the real stuff. It's a unique medium that offers benefits you literally cannot get on land. Hydrostatic cardiovascular conditioning, full body resisted movement with zero joint compression, cognitive engagement from navigating a three-dimensional environment. And the evidence is clear. Swimming done consistently and with moderate intensity reduces all-cause mortality risk, lowers blood pressure, supports joint health, maintains functional fitness as we age, and can be sustained for a lifetime without the accumulated wear and tear that often sidelines runners and other high-impact athletes. If this episode has done one thing, I hope it's put swimming back on your list, not as a recovery day option, but as a legitimate, scientifically supported primary form of exercise. Today's rule: the best exercise for your longevity isn't the one that hurts the most. It's the one you can do for the rest of your life with joy.
I love that rule. And here's my personal takeaway from this conversation. Starting tomorrow when I go to the pool, I'm not going to think of it as my easy day. I'm going to think of it as my cardiovascular optimization day, my bone maintenance day, my brain health day, because that's actually what the science shows it is. And I'm going to swim with the confidence that I'm not taking it easy, I'm being smart. Claire, this has been genuinely eye-opening. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And to everyone listening, if you enjoyed this deep dive, another water pun, I apologize. Please subscribe to Longevity Lab and hit the notification bell. We release a new evidence-based episode every day, covering the health science that actually matters, without the hype and without trying to sell you anything, just what the research shows. Share this episode with someone who's been avoiding the pool because they thought it wasn't a real workout. They deserve to know the truth. I'm Claire.
And I'm Robert. We'll see you tomorrow for another episode of Longevity Lab. Until then, stay curious, stay active, and maybe go for a swim.
And as always, please remember, the information in this episode is for educational purposes only. It's not medical advice. If you're considering changing your exercise routine or have any health concerns, please consult your doctor or a qualified healthcare provider. Your health decisions should always be made with personalized professional guidance.